Hi, my name is David, and the last time I looked into my fiancé's eyes was the moment she screamed, "You'd never be a good wife. I'm not marrying you." She said it in front of everyone. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I just walked away. But what broke me wasn't the shouting, it was the silence after. It was the message from her friend that night. "Do you even know what happened after you left?" That's when I realized this wasn't just about her. It was about a family that never planned to keep me. And what they did next, no one saw coming. The room was full in the way family gatherings usually are. Too many conversations layered over one another, glasses clinking, someone laughing a little louder than necessary. I stood near the dining table, nodding at familiar faces, answering questions I'd answered 100 times before. How's work? How's the house? When's the wedding? I was calm, maybe even relieved. These events always carried a low hum of tension for me, but that night felt manageable. I remember thinking I could get through a few hours, smile when needed, and leave with my dignity intact. Then his voice cut through everything. "You'd never be a good wife. I'm not marrying you." It wasn't shouted, but it didn't need to be. The room stalled. Sound didn't disappear so much as flatten. I didn't hear the music anymore. I didn't hear the clink of forks. What I noticed instead were faces. A friend's eyes widening. Someone's mouth half open, caught between surprise and discomfort. His sister staring at the floor like it might save her from being part of it. I didn't ask him to repeat himself. I didn't need to. The words had landed exactly where they were meant to. That was the moment people think they know what they do. They imagine a sharp reply, a defense, a public reckoning. I did none of that. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I didn't try to win the room back. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing in public doesn't restore dignity. It only feeds the spectacle. I looked at him once, not with anger, not with pleading, just long enough to understand that this wasn't about confusion or stress. It was a choice. Then I stood up. The quiet that followed wasn't accidental. It was something I allowed. I walked past the table, past the people who suddenly found their drinks fascinating, and toward the door. I could feel eyes on my back. I didn't rush. Leaving slowly was part of the control. As I turned, I noticed something small that explained more than his words ever could. At the main table, near where the family usually sat, there was an empty chair. No one motioned for me to take it. No one acknowledged it at all. Earlier, without comment, I'd pulled a chair from the side and sat there instead. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. Looking at it now, untouched and waiting for no one, I understood the truth. My place had always been provisional, accepted when convenient, withdrawn when it wasn't. I stepped outside into the night. The air was cooler, cleaner, honest in a way the room hadn't been. I stood there for a moment, listening to the muted sounds of the party behind the door, then walked to my car. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I drove home with both hands on the wheel, aware of something heavier than the end of an engagement settling in my chest. What hurt most wasn't that he'd ended it. It was that he'd dismissed me in front of people who mattered to me. Dignity doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it leaves quietly because staying would cost too much. At home, the silence felt different, the kind that presses in when there's nothing left to perform. I set my keys down, poured a glass of water, and sat at the table without turning on the lights. My phone rested nearby, face up. Minutes passed, then longer. When the screen finally lit up, it wasn't his name. It was one of his friends. Someone who'd been there. Someone who'd seen everything. The message was short. Do you have any idea what happened after you left? I stared at it longer than I should have. Long enough to feel the weight of the empty chair again. Long enough to know the night wasn't finished with me. I typed one word. What? Do you have any idea what happened after you left? I didn't even set the phone down. I just stared at the screen, the word "what" still sitting there like a dare. Then it rang. I let it vibrate in my hand longer than I needed to. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear his voice, but it wasn't him. It was Caleb, one of his oldest friends, quiet, observant, the kind of man who usually stayed out of drama. We'd never been close, but he'd always been decent. I finally answered. Yeah? His voice was low. Not nervous exactly, but like he was measuring every word before he let it out. Are you alone? Somewhere you can talk? That was the first sign something was off. Caleb never called for small talk, and he definitely didn't ask for safety checks. Yeah, I'm home. A pause. I probably shouldn't be calling, he said. But after tonight, I just didn't feel right keeping it to myself. I didn't say anything. Let the silence work. He exhaled. Look, I'm not trying to stir the pot, but do you want to know what happened after you walked out? Another pause. He was stalling, which meant he wasn't just being polite. He was debating if he should even be telling me. Yes, I said. He cleared his throat. At first, no one knew what to do. People were frozen. Then your ex-fiancé tried to act like it wasn't a big deal. Said you were just emotional lately, and that things had been rough between you two for weeks. That was rich. I hadn't raised my voice once in the last month, even when he'd come home hours late or shut down conversations with, "We'll talk about it later." People looked confused, Caleb continued. His mom tried to lighten the mood, made a joke about cold feet, but no one was really buying it. I pictured the scene clearly. Him smirking like it was a misunderstanding, his family sweeping it under the rug, as they always did. Then he said something that didn't sit right with me, Caleb added, voice tighter now. He said, "She made it easy, walking out like that. I didn't even have to finish the story." My jaw clenched, but I kept still. What story? I don't know exactly, but he and his brother, Eli, had been talking in low voices before the dinner even started. Eli said something like, "Just do it tonight and be done with it." I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling like it could give me answers. There it was, confirmation that this hadn't been spontaneous. It had been staged. This wasn't supposed to happen like that, Caleb muttered, almost to himself. What do you mean? He hesitated, then admitted, "There were conversations. I didn't catch everything, but I know they were planning something. You were never supposed to walk away. He thought you'd react, maybe cry, make a scene. Then he could twist the narrative. And when I didn't, he looked thrown off," Caleb said. Honestly, he was pissed. You not reacting took the wind out of him. I let the silence hang for a beat. Then I asked, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I watched it unfold and something about it felt off. You didn't deserve that. And the way he turned it around afterward, it didn't sit right." I nodded, not that he could see. "Thanks for telling me." He wasn't done. "There's one more thing." "Go ahead." He hesitated again. He said something when he thought no one was listening. Told Eli, "Now she's out of the way, we can clean this up easy." I didn't flinch, but my chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt before. "Out of the way," I repeated, Yeah, like you were just an obstacle to clear. I took a breath, slow and quiet. That's all I need, Caleb. Thanks. Are you okay? I could hear the guilt in his voice, the discomfort of someone who just handed you a loaded gun and wasn't sure how you'd use it. I'm fine, I said. But Caleb? Yeah? Don't tell anyone we spoke. He agreed and we hung up. The room felt smaller after that, not darker, just heavier. I sat there, letting the words settle, not just his words, but mine. The ones I hadn't said, the ones I'd swallowed for months. People think the end of a relationship is the betrayal, but they're wrong. The real betrayal is realizing the person you trusted wasn't just done with you. They'd planned how to break you. That's when I realized the breakup wasn't the betrayal. It was only the cover. I barely slept. Not from pain exactly, more like a slow, steady pressure under my skin that wouldn't ease. I thought that naming the betrayal would bring some kind of relief. Closure, maybe. But morning came, and instead of peace, there was just clarity. The house felt quieter than usual, but not in a restful way. It was the kind of quiet that asks you questions before you've even brushed your teeth. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the window where the light had just begun to creep in. Caleb's words kept looping in my head. Now she's out of the way. It wasn't just cruel. It was deliberate. The whole thing had been. Not a flare-up. Not a misstep. A plan. And silence, my silence, had left a blank page for others to write on. I moved through the house slowly, brewing coffee just for the motion of it. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't sure if I was even awake in the right way. Just breathing in a place I used to feel safe. The phone rang a little before 9. I let it buzz twice before answering. It was my cousin, Dana. We weren't close, but she had a habit of calling during moments she didn't fully understand. Hey, she said, a little too light. I just wanted to check in. I heard, well, you know. Yeah, I kept my voice level. There was a pause, then a soft hum of sympathy. I'm sure things got heated. You two always had big personalities. That's how she framed it, like it was a mutual burst of emotion. Two people arguing in a parking lot, not one publicly humiliating the other with a script already written. I didn't correct her. She sighed. Anyway, I heard you left kind of abruptly. People were confused. Some folks thought you'd make a scene, but then you just walked out. There was no question in her voice, just assumption wrapped in politeness. Another call came in before noon. This time it was my aunt, then my mother's friend, then someone from church I hadn't seen in months. All of them wanted to check in. All of them had already heard a version of the story, and none of them asked what he had said to me. Instead, they asked things like, "Why did you overreact?" Or, "You embarrassed the family walking out like that." Or, my favorite, "Couldn't this have been handled in private?" Handled in private? Like it hadn't exploded in a room full of people already? That's when I realized something new. The pain didn't come from their disbelief. It came from how quickly they were willing to believe something else entirely. Not one person asked me what it felt like to sit there and hear those words. No one asked what led to that moment. They weren't looking for truth. They were looking for comfort, and blaming me gave it to them. I could have defended myself, laid out the facts, told them how it had been building for weeks, how I hadn't raised my voice once, how I'd given him more grace than he ever earned. But I didn't. Not because I didn't care, but because I did. And I knew it wouldn't matter. They weren't calling to understand. They were calling to justify what they already believed. And I wasn't going to feed that. So I let them talk. Let them say their piece. I nodded into the silence and offered no corrections. There's a cost to staying quiet. I felt it by mid-afternoon. The shift in tone, the way people paused before saying my name, the subtle distance in their voices, the unspoken message. I'd broken the script. I'd walked off stage without delivering the final line. And now, they were left rewriting it. And still, I stayed silent. Because the alternative, defending myself to people who'd already chosen a side, wasn't a conversation. It was a performance. And I was done performing. I sat on the back porch as the sun dipped low, phone in hand, unanswered messages stacking up. Each one felt heavier than the last. They weren't trying to understand me. They were reshaping me into a version that made sense to them. Then the final call came in for the day. It was his mother. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally played the message, her voice was clipped. Not cruel, just cold. She said, "I don't know what happened between you two, but making a scene like that, well, it put the whole family in a difficult spot. I hope, for everyone's sake, you find a way to be gracious about all this." Gracious. As if dignity was a performance I owed them. As if silence was a favor I should be ashamed of. I stared at the wall for a long time after that. Long enough to feel the weight settle deep. That day taught me more than I wanted to learn. Silence, I thought, was supposed to protect you, give you space, time. But sometimes silence doesn't protect you. Sometimes it cages you in. By the time the calls stopped, I understood something clearly. This wasn't just between the two of us anymore. The messages had stopped, but the silence didn't bring relief. It only made space for the next wave. I didn't have to wait long. By late morning, I got a call from my older sister, Marcy. We hadn't spoken much in recent years, not since our father's funeral. She always kept her voice calm, like a school teacher managing a room full of rowdy kids. That day was no different. "Hey," she began, a little too light. "Mom and I were thinking, maybe you should come over tonight. Nothing formal, just a chance to talk. Clear the air. Clear the air." I let the phrase sit for a second before answering. "Sure. What time?" "6. Just dinner. Nothing dramatic." The words were smooth, clean, perfectly spaced, like a press release written in real time. I hung up, staring at the phone for a moment longer. There was no mention of Caleb, no direct reference to the night. Just an invitation to talk, delivered with the kind of softness that made you forget a knife might be hidden behind it. That evening, I parked outside my childhood home, the porch light already on even though the sky hadn't fully darkened yet. I sat in the car for a moment, watching the breeze shift the curtains inside. The same house, same windows, but something about it felt unfamiliar now, like I'd been invited as a guest instead of returning as a son. Inside, the smell of roast chicken filled the air. My mom met me with a light hug, one of those arms around you but not too tight gestures. My sister sat at the table, flipping through a magazine like she hadn't been waiting. We made small talk, weather, work, a new neighbor's dog. Then, as the plates were cleared, the real purpose emerged. "We just want to understand," my mom said, folding a napkin too carefully. "What happened the other night, it caught everyone off guard," Marcy chimed in. "We all just want peace. This has stirred up a lot." She didn't say who stirred it, just that it had been stirred. I nodded slowly, letting them talk. The conversation drifted toward both sides, about reactions and family reputation. There was no mention of what Caleb had said, just concern that I'd walked out without explanation. "It's not about taking sides," my mom added gently. "It's about keeping the family together. For everyone's sake." For everyone's sake. That was the phrase that changed the air in the room. I looked across the table at my sister. She'd chosen the seat that Dad used to sit in. I sat on the far end, nearest the hallway. Not quite at the head, not quite in the center. I realized then I'd never actually had a side in this family. I'd always been the one keeping the middle ground intact. And now, they were asking me to patch things up. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because someone had to make it right. And they'd already decided it would be me. That was the unspoken contract. "You know how people are," Marcy said, her tone tilting toward caution. "They remember how things end, not how they start." Then came the ask. Mom leaned forward. "Would you consider talking to Caleb? Maybe even framing what happened as a misunderstanding?" There it was. The price. I sat back, arms crossed. My chest didn't tighten. It settled. Heavy, but still. They wanted me to say I'd overreacted, that I hadn't understood his tone or his stress or whatever excuse made the story smoother. They wanted the tension erased from memory, not resolved. I looked around the kitchen. The fridge still had the same family photos. My high school graduation, Marcy's wedding, Dad fishing in Michigan. I wasn't removed from this family. I was woven into it. But this wasn't support. This was diplomacy. And I was being offered as the peace treaty. I didn't speak much the rest of the night. Just nodded at the right moments. Let the conversation move on. But inside, something shifted. For the first time, I didn't try to smooth it over. Not in my head, not in my heart. I didn't make excuses for them. I didn't negotiate my reaction down to something more polite. I saw it for what it was. Not a dinner, not a conversation. A transaction. As I walked out to my car under a sky barely clinging to twilight, I realized the night hadn't been about understanding. It had been about assigning blame gently, wrapping it in soft language and family recipes. They thought the meeting was about fixing what broke. I realized it was about deciding who would carry it. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table long after the coffee went cold, staring at the half-empty mug like it might explain something I missed. The conversation from the night before replayed in my mind, frame by frame, every well-meaning sentence soaked in quiet expectation. "We just want peace." A phrase dressed in kindness, hiding its sharp edge. Not once did they say I was wrong. They didn't need to. Their tone did it for them. Somehow, I'd become the one who needed to make things right. Again. I thought about how many times I'd been the bridge. The one to smooth tension, make the joke, step back first. I did it because I thought that's what mature people did. People who knew better. People who didn't want to see things fall apart. I believed in peace. But no one warns you. Being the reasonable one means you're always expected to give more. And when you stop giving, people act like you're the problem. By noon, my phone was quiet. Not silent in the comforting way. Empty in the kind that makes your thoughts echo too loud. I hadn't realized how often they texted me. My cousins, old friends, even my mother. Now the only thing lighting up the screen was promotional emails. One from my gym. Another from a bookstore I hadn't visited in over a year. No one was fighting with me. They just weren't talking to me at all. I walked around the house, aimless, opened drawers I didn't need anything from, stared out windows that offered nothing new. I wasn't in exile, not exactly, but I was being skipped, not consulted, not invited. The kind of absence that comes from a quiet vote taken when you weren't in the room. And I started to feel it, the pull, the need to fix it. I picked up my phone more than once, thought about sending a message, just a few lines, something soft. Hey, I know things have been heavy. I never wanted to upset anyone, even though I didn't believe I had. I thought about how easy it would be to call it a misunderstanding, to take on the discomfort so everyone else could breathe easier. I understood then why people do it, why they apologize for things they didn't do. Because sometimes the silence around you is louder than any argument. I almost did it. Almost. And then something shifted. I was sorting through a drawer in the study, one of those cluttered catch-all places. A tangle of receipts, birthday cards, half-used notebooks. That's when I saw it. A printed email, folded into quarters. Not mine. His. I remembered that Caleb had printed it a few weeks back. He said he needed it for something. I never paid attention. But now, reading the date, the subject line, it didn't line up. He had told me the dinner where he made that public scene had been arranged last minute, said his mom had insisted, pressured him into it, but the email was a forwarded invitation from him sent 2 weeks before the dinner, to his sister, with the subject, "She won't see this coming." I sat back, blinked. It wasn't explosive, no dramatic confession, just a quiet contradiction. But I knew what it meant. It wasn't a slip of emotion. It was a setup, and I had walked straight into it. I didn't pace. I didn't shout. I grabbed a legal pad from the shelf and started writing. Not a journal, not a rant, just facts, dates, words I remembered, conversations, that email, the timing, the shift in tone with my mother, the messages that had stopped. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like reality checking itself. Somewhere along the line, I'd let everyone else define what was reasonable, what peace looked like, what family meant. But now, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I just wanted the truth to stand somewhere. And if no one else would hold it, I would. For the first time since that night, I wasn't asking how to fix this. I was asking what was actually true. I didn't sleep much that night, not from restlessness or regret, but from awareness. Something had shifted inside me, and once it did, I couldn't put it back. I sat in the same chair where I'd first opened that email, legal pad in front of me, pen tapping slowly against my knee. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore, not calls, not apologies, not explanations. What I wanted now was something cleaner, understanding, and not the emotional kind, the practical kind, the kind that builds slowly when you finally stop asking why people hurt you and start asking how. That's when things start lining up. I pulled my laptop over, opened the email again. This time, I didn't just read it. I studied it. The tone, the timing, the way it was forwarded, not directly sent. The small phrase at the top, "Thought this might help set the mood." That phrase echoed in my head, not because it was loud, but because it was so casual. This hadn't been spontaneous. This wasn't a man who lost his temper at dinner. This was someone who wanted a scene, who planned for one. And while I'd been caught off guard, it seemed a few others already knew their lines. I went back through calendar invites, dinner arrangements, messages about what to bring or wear, and in between them, a thread emerged, quiet, but clear. There had been choices made without me. I was in the picture, but not in the room. For weeks, even months before that night, I had been left out of decisions that directly involved me. My name appeared. My presence was assumed, but I hadn't been told the plan. They had already written the ending before I walked onto the stage, and the more I looked, the more deliberate it felt. There was the moment at his sister's birthday where I was asked to go grab the drinks right before a private toast. Back then, I thought it was accidental. Now I saw the pattern, remove me from the room, then shape the version of events. There was a forwarded text thread about the engagement party, one that mentioned scaling back to avoid awkwardness. I hadn't known there was awkwardness, at least not until now. And then there was a call. I reached out, not emotionally, not confrontationally, to one person, an old college friend who had been at the dinner but sat closer to the kitchen near the back. I asked one question. Do you remember when the invitations for that night went out? There was a pause on the line. Then he said, I think we got them a few weeks before. Didn't you help plan it? I told him no. There was silence again. I just assumed you weren't on the listserv? Listserv. A group message I never knew existed. That was it. No drama, no fallout. Just a moment of quiet confirmation. And that's how truth comes. Not with a bang, but with a single sentence that makes the whole house of cards fall neatly in your lap. After that, I could have exploded. I imagined it. Every angry word I could throw back. Every lie I could expose. Every look I could deliver across that same dining table. But I didn't want to perform. That's what they expected. That's what they wanted. Because then they could step back and say, see, he's just emotional. He's hurt. He's exaggerating. And I was done playing that role. So I kept quiet. I closed the tabs. I stopped scrolling. I left my notes where they were. But something inside me hardened, not into anger, but into shape. That night, I made a different decision. One I didn't say out loud, but felt like a full stop in my chest. I wouldn't explain my silence anymore. I wouldn't attend another meeting dressed up as checking in or clearing the air. I wouldn't be the reasonable one, just so the unreasonable could stay comfortable. I didn't call anyone to announce this shift, but I did something better. I sat down, opened a new folder on my computer, and titled it, My Side Documented. Emails, dates, screenshots, small things. Not to use, not yet. But to remember. Because facts matter when memory starts to bend. And peace, real peace, only comes when you stop mistaking silence for safety. I knew how this looked to them. That I'd retreated. That I was licking wounds. That I had nothing to say because I was too ashamed or too defeated. They thought my quiet meant I was backing down. I was actually stepping out of their reach. Pulling away was never about disappearing. It was about observing, from a place where their noise couldn't reach me, where their strategies lost their grip. I didn't slam doors. I didn't issue threats. I just stopped showing up the way they were used to. And somehow, that became the most threatening thing I could do. I noticed it first in the subtle shifts. A voicemail from my aunt, her voice extra bright, calling just to see how I was doing. Then a message from Mark's cousin, someone I hadn't spoken to directly in months, telling me how everyone was a little worried and how nobody meant harm. The phrasing was too familiar, too rehearsed. Silence hadn't settled the dust. It stirred it up. When I stepped back, they didn't breathe a sigh of relief. They moved in, tried to reframe things, tried to repaint the absence into instability. And sure enough, it didn't take long before the new version of me started making its rounds. Apparently, I'd isolated myself. I was refusing support. One cousin said he heard I'd been unwell, not physically, but mentally stressed. Another mentioned that someone thought I was still processing the trauma and maybe shouldn't be left alone too much. I wasn't being attacked. I was being rewritten. It was a different kind of violence, gentler on the surface but sharper underneath. The kind where people tilt their heads and lower their voices when your name comes up. The kind where concern becomes a weapon. And the hardest part? It almost worked. There was one morning, I can't even remember what sparked it, but I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, fingers hovering over the screen. The drafts folder was open. I'd started typing, "Hey, I just wanted to clear the air." I stared at the blinking cursor. I don't know how long. And for a moment, I felt it. That pull. The one that tells you maybe giving in would just be easier. That maybe saying I overreacted would end it. That maybe, if I just wore the story they made for me, the noise would finally stop. That was the dangerous moment. The one where the lie doesn't shout, it whispers. Sounds reasonable, practical, adult. And then, like a pin dropped in a quiet room, it came. I mean, if he's not talking, that tells you everything, doesn't it? That sentence, relayed to me by someone who'd overheard it at a family dinner, stopped me cold. It was said offhand, not with anger, just a shrug, like a conclusion that no longer needed proof. They didn't just misunderstand my silence. They were using it as confirmation. They thought I wouldn't respond. They thought I couldn't. Oh, that's when something clicked. All that time, I'd been documenting, collecting, sitting with facts and timelines like they were weight I didn't yet know how to lift. But now I saw them for what they were. Not baggage, but tools. I stopped asking who believed what. I started asking what I was willing to let define me. I opened that folder on my laptop, my side, documented. I reviewed everything, again, one page at a time, no rush, no rage. I didn't care if they ever admitted what they did. I didn't even care if they apologized. What I cared about now was clarity. Not for them, for me. I didn't need every detail lined up like a legal case. I just needed enough. Enough to speak once and let the silence that followed be theirs to carry. I drafted my final message, not a speech, not a defense, just a statement. A few truths, dates, screenshots, if necessary. No commentary, no bitterness, no emotional hooks. I wasn't playing chess. I was flipping the board over and walking away. Because the truth wasn't a performance, and I wasn't a character they got to edit. They were still talking. They didn't know I was done listening. They were still talking, but this time I wasn't listening. Not because I didn't care, but because there was nothing left for me to learn from the noise. So when the message came, "We're hoping to have one last conversation for closure," I didn't flinch. I didn't brace for impact. I simply replied, "Okay, let me know the time." It was set for Sunday afternoon. A neutral place again. One of the cousins' homes. The kind of setting chosen for its warmth, which somehow always meant controlled. I arrived on time, alone. No folder, no ally, no rehearsed speech. Just me, and the calm I had built from weeks of knowing I wasn't crazy, only quiet. The living room had already been staged, lamps on low. The smell of something baked, like hospitality could sweeten strategy. And the first thing I saw as I stepped in was the chair. Same shape, same position, end of the table, waiting for me. The same kind of chair I hadn't been offered at that first gathering, back when they forgot to include me in the family email chain. Back when decisions were made on behalf of everyone. That empty space used to represent exclusion. Now it was dressed as an invitation. One of the aunts, Diane, smiled and motioned to it. "We saved you a spot." I nodded, but didn't move. They took their seats. 5 of them. Familiar faces with unfamiliar expressions. Too careful, too polite. Like something scripted had just begun. "Thank you for coming," Diane began. "We thought it was time to finally clear the air." I stood near the window, hands resting loosely in front of me. Not in defiance. In intention. They spoke first. I let them. This time, the framing was polished. They weren't angry. They were concerned. They weren't accusing. They were narrating. They said they'd been trying to reach me, but I'd become distant. They mentioned how confusing it had been when I left without explanation. How I had seemed unstable in recent months. Withdrawing, not responding, not showing up for the family. And there it was. The climax of their version. I had refused to engage, and therefore they had no choice but to interpret that as avoidance. It was masterful, really, because every line carried just enough truth to sound reasonable, but not enough to be fair. I didn't interrupt. When they finished, the room settled. Someone shifted in their seat. Another cleared their throat. Diane looked at me again. "You can take the seat. We're here to listen too." I looked down at the chair. The wood gleamed slightly in the soft light. It was clean, cushioned, positioned as if I belonged. But I had already taken my position. I was standing. "No, thank you," I said quietly. Then, after a breath, I spoke one sentence. "April 3rd, the meeting with the attorney was scheduled without informing me." That was it. No tone, no accusation, just a date, a fact. Silence fell like a curtain. I watched them, eyes darting. One blinked too fast, another sat straighter. Like posture might anchor the moment. No one denied it outright. One of them mumbled something about miscommunication. Another started explaining quickly, but not clearly. The shift didn't explode. It leaked. Their grip on the story loosened. Not because I attacked it, but because I didn't defend myself. I didn't offer more. I didn't explain where I'd been. I didn't tell them how deeply they'd hurt me, or how much time I'd spent stitching myself back together while they stitched a new narrative. I didn't need to. The moment had already shifted. I looked at the chair once more, then back at them. "I won't be staying," I said, "but thank you for inviting me." It wasn't sarcasm, it was closure. I turned toward the door, and no one followed. No raised voices, no apologies shouted in desperation, just the soft weight of everything unsaid, and a chair that remained empty. But this time, not because they didn't offer it, because I didn't need it. For the first time, the silence belonged to me. The air outside was cooler than I expected for late spring. I stood at the curb for a moment after leaving their house. The same house where they had once decided, without saying it, that I didn't count. This time, I wasn't standing outside because I wasn't let in. I had walked out on my own. I hadn't slammed the door. I hadn't raised my voice. I just didn't take the chair. That night, I didn't talk to anyone. No debrief. No late-night message. No poring over what I could have said differently. I went home, heated leftover soup, and ate in silence with the television off. The noise faded slowly over the next few days. Not just theirs, mine too. I stopped checking for updates, stopped refreshing inboxes, stopped rehearsing imaginary arguments that never made me feel better. The energy that used to swirl like a storm in my chest now just passed through me like wind. No apologies came, not the kind that mattered. There were a few vague texts. Thinking of you, hope you're okay, just checking in. None of which addressed anything real. But oddly enough, I didn't feel angry. I felt clean. You can't hold someone accountable when they're still pretending nothing happened. And you can't keep fighting people who thrive in the mess. Eventually, you just let go of the rope. Days passed like they used to, quietly. The calendar filled itself again with normal things. A doctor's appointment, groceries, mowing the lawn. Somewhere in between, the ache lost its edge. It didn't vanish. It just stopped defining me. I heard indirectly that the story kept shifting. Someone told someone else that I had gone through a lot lately. Another relative said I was healing. I became a whisper, not a problem. A soft narrative wrapped in concern. Instead of the truth, they'd shut me out, then blamed me for being quiet. Still, I didn't correct them. I didn't reach out to straighten the record. I didn't need revenge. I needed air and distance. Real, chosen distance gave me that. I started enjoying the ordinary again. I took slow walks after dinner. I read the paper in the mornings like my father used to. I fixed the squeaky hinge on the bathroom door that had annoyed me for months. These weren't distractions. They were reclamations. Each small act of routine was a line I was drawing, not from the past, but toward something better. One afternoon, while cleaning the hallway closet, I found a box I hadn't opened in years. Old birthday cards, notes, a spare key to an apartment I no longer had access to. At the bottom, tucked in a folder, was a seating chart from one of the family gatherings years ago. My name was written in, then crossed out, with a tiny note beside it. He said, maybe. I don't even remember saying that, but I remember the feeling, that constant uncertainty of whether I was welcome, wanted, or just tolerated. That moment in time, small as it was, showed me how long I'd been sitting in places that were never truly mine. I threw the chart away. That night, in my own kitchen, I made a simple dinner. Pasta and grilled vegetables. I poured myself a glass of wine, not to unwind from stress, but just to enjoy. And then I pulled out the small table by the window. Just one chair, slightly worn, sturdy. I sat. Not because someone offered it to me, not because I fought for the right to be there, but because this place, this quiet, ordinary, solid space, fit me. That chair didn't symbolize power or exclusion or approval. It was just a chair. And I was just a person who no longer needed validation to feel real. So, if you're listening now, if you've been in the middle of your own storm, waiting for the noise to stop, wondering if stepping back means surrender, I'll tell you what I've learned. Silence doesn't mean weakness. And walking away doesn't mean you gave up. Sometimes, leaving the room is the most honest thing you can do. Sometimes, sitting in the chair that you chose, even if no one's watching, is more powerful than winning any argument. I didn't lose a future that night. I stopped living in a place that never had room for me.